Well, hello, pedigree fans. Welcome to Intro to Pedigree Analysis.
Good morning.
Oh, good morning, Patrick. I'm glad you could be here. Okay, pedigrees are the only way we can study inheritance in humans because we don't do crosses in humans. You can't just say, here's a guy and here's a woman and you guys need to have 100 kids so we can calculate some probabilities and look at some traits. But we can use their pedigree or their family history to figure out if we think a new trait is dominant or recessive, or a trait that we know already, that we know is a dominant trait or a recessive trait. What is the probability of children of a specific couple of having that trait? So a little, I don't even know what I'm saying. Sorry, I'm a little tired, but I appreciate you guys sticking with me. Genetic counseling, that's the word I'm looking for. Okay. Patrick. Okay. Honestly, Patrick needs to chill out a little bit. Okay. Moving on. Sorry. Okay, so here's the legend. I guess that's what we would call it, right? Of the rules, the legend, or the rules of pedigrees. And so I'm not going to read these to you. These things are things you need to know. Anything filled in, sometimes, right, most of them are in black and white, so it's not necessarily red, but a filled in circle or square or diamond means that person is affected or sick, right? Not all disorders make you sick, but it's just easier than affected and unaffected, right? You have it, you're sick, you show the trait, and so forth. We don't always tell you who's a carrier. A lot of times that's you to infer from the pedigree because we don't always know for sure. Sometimes it's a probability of being a carrier. Sometimes you have to be a carrier, blah, blah, blah. So you need to know these to help you understand what the pedigree is going to look like and how to actually answer it, right? Figure out what's what. So here's some examples, right? Here's a little family. Circles are girls, squares are boys. You can see the birth order. If we, look at adoptions, how twins are denoted, and then, as always, consanguinity, which would be people who are cousins, right, in the same family. And so a lot of times that's how recessive traits perpetuate. So if you look at the royal family, of any royal family, right, the whole point was they had to marry a related person because you had to marry somebody of royalty. And so there's only so many royal families, and they keep intermixing, and they're all just one big family, that's especially in Europe. But there are lots of places like that. Or specifically, you have to marry within your religion, and you're in a small community. And, way back when, traveling, if you were traveling by horse or walking, right, there was no way to get easily to a neighboring community or a faraway community. So people intermarried within their own community. And so we ended up seeing more cousin marriages and matings, right?
Oh, please.
Oh, Squidward, just get over it. It's fine. Jeez. I don't know how we got SpongeBob and friends in the studio today, but we definitely did. Okay, so again, read this. I don't need to read to you, but I wanted to go through it. So this you need to know. You got to know this stuff. Live it, learn it, love it. Hey.
Can we lower the volume, please?
Squidward, I have to talk loud. That's how I lecture. I'm sorry if it sounds like I'm yelling at people, but I'm sorry. That's just what I do. I yell at people while I'm lecturing. So, there you go. Okay, rules, recessive traits. Unaffected parents can have affected progeny. Never ever see that in dominant. Right? If it's consanguineous, that's a dead giveaway that it's going to be one of those that it might be recessive. Don't just automatically write recessive or pick recessive. Make sure you look at the traits so we can figure it out. All progeny from two affected individuals, that would be like the squares, have to be Affected. Not true in dominant. Can be, but not true. And it can skip generations, which generally doesn't in dominant traits.
Hold on there, little square dude.
Yes, I know. This is crazy info. So let's take a look at some of this stuff. Oh, here's our little rules. They're squeezed up in the corner. I'm going to make it so we can actually see. And I'm going to draw you a few pictures. Okay, unaffected parents. So our first step, here's unaffected dad, unaffected mom, can have affected progeny. We'll say it's a son, but it could be the diamond shape, which is just neither. So how does this happen? Okay, if we're recessive and we're talking affective, that means the colored in have it or are sick. So we know the colored in guy, that guy, is affected. And if it's a rare trait, the only time, how do you see rare traits, right? How do you know for sure that you see it if it's recessive? What do you have to have? I don't know what I'm talking about. What alleles do you have to have? Spit it out, Malone. We're going to use R's. You have to be homozygous, right? In order to see a recessive trait, the only time you ever see recessive traits is when they're homozygous recessive. So that we know right now. Okay, Patrick, it's not that funny. It's not funny at all. I don't know what your problem is, okay? So we know one of the R's came from mom, and one of the R's came from dad. By definition, right, that's the gametes. That's, right, separation of alleles, the segregation, law of segregation. You can't get both from one. You have to get one allele from each parent. So that means mom has to have one and dad has to have one. And now they're not sick. So they're not colored in. So they can't be little r, right? Because little r equals sick. Or colored in. Solid, whatever you want to call it. So the parents can't be that. So what do they have to be? Well, if they're not little r, they have to have a big R and a big R. And so they're heterozygous. And so if you're heterozygous and it's a recessive trait, you have to look normal. Not sick. Yes? 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 Yes, you do. SpongeBob, what do you think?
Oops. I guess I ripped my pants again.
Okay, I don't care. I was asking you about whatever. I guess I probably shouldn't bother with, SpongeBob and especially Patrick. Not a genius. All right, back to this. So, big R, little r looks like the dominant trait, and this case, if it's a recessive illness, sickness, disorder, trait, the only one that have it are little r. So big R, little r, not, or normal. And then, of course, big R, right? Homozygous dominant. You can't possibly have a recessive trait. You don't even have one of the alleles. Okay, so in this case, both parents are carriers. Because they're carrying that little allele, but they look normal. But they could give it to their child. Okay. I wrote too big because I have other stuff I need to put on here. So I'm going to make this even smaller. Right there. Okay, what's the next one? Frequently show up in consanguineous matings, blah, blah, blah. We know that. All progeny from two affected individuals. So that means mom and dad are sick. Offspring must be affected. Why? Why do you think that is? Why do you think so? What do you think?
How did I ever get surrounded by such loser neighbors?
Squidward, I don't care about your neighbors. Like, honestly, what is going on in this room? I'm trying. Okay, I'm just trying to teach. Here we go. Okay, so what do we know? We know colored in guys have to be little r. So this one has to be little r. And then by definition, this has to be little r. Right? You can't get a big R from two parents that only have little r's. And it can skip generations. So what can we not have? If we ever see this, oh, wrong color. If we ever see this, could that ever be recessive? Could it? Could it ever be recessive?
Oh, please.
Exactly. No, there's no freaking way. There's no possible way to get an open square. In order to have an open square, you have to have at least one big R. One big R blank. That's what an open has to be in a recessive, if it's a recessive trait. If you're told it's a recessive trait, you can never see this, right? You can't get a big R from that guy. No. Can you get a big R from that guy? No. So you can never ever have a big R. So you can never ever see this in a recessive trait. So if you see this setup, 2, 6, make a not sick, it has to be a dominant trait. Not recessive. No, 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 no. So that's a telltale sign that it must be dominant or not recessive. Right? Right. So that is exactly what we're going to be looking for in pedigrees, is telltale signs, things that tell us for sure which way it has to be, or which way it can't be. If it can't be recessive, it has to be dominant. If it can't be dominant, it has to be recessive. Okay, let's move on. Okay, so here's the rules. Autosomal recessive traits usually appear equally in males and females, right? It's not X-linked. If something's X-linked, we see lots of boys, very few girls. Tend to skip generations. Yes, it can. So if you're looking overall and you see something skip, like there's nobody in this generation, then we're going to take our guess that it's recessive and we're going to try to see if it really works out that way. We wouldn't just automatically pick an answer unless you're almost out of time. If you see it skip, pick recessive, right? If you have time, make sure you look. Autosomal traits more likely to appear among progeny of related parents. Yeah, that's these first cousins. But again, here's a nice telltale sign on this guy. Let's look at this mating and this mating. 2 unaffecteds, this guy and this guy, they don't have it, have an affected offspring. We know this colored in guy has to be little r, which means dad had to have a little r and mom had to have a little r. That's how baby girl got 2 little r's. They're open, so they must have a big R. So 2 unaffecteds having unaffected, right, works for recessive. Same here. This boy has to be little r. That means little r came from dad, little r came from mom, but they're both open, which means their other one has to be a big R. Tips for recessive trait analysis. Ooh. So just what we said, in an individual to be affected, if you are sick, you have it, you're homozygous. Then both parents must be carriers, or one of them has to have it, right? So how do we do this? How do we calculate the chance that a couple might have an affected offspring? We're going to use the product rule. Chance events occurring together. If 2 things have to occur together to get something to happen, then you multiply the probabilities. We have to make this simplifying assumption that unrelated, unaffected individuals are not carriers. If you marry in, you're not a carrier of a rare disorder. That's the whole point of being rare. There's not a lot of them out there in the population. Now, if you know you're a carrier for cystic fibrosis, or there's people in your family that have had cystic fibrosis, and you meet your mate at a cystic fibrosis support group, then yeah, they might actually be carriers too if it runs in their family. But if you just meet some random person at a bar it's unlikely that their family has this rare trait. It's within the realm of possibility, but it's highly unlikely if it's something that's very rare. So you can assume anybody marrying in is unaffected unless their offspring negate that. So if they have a kid, if two unaffecteds, even if this person we know, let's say we know this person's a carrier, or we're guessing that they are because, somebody else in the family had it, and this person here marries in, and we would assume, what? Not a carrier. But then their kid ends up having it. One of their kids ends up having it. We know it's little r, little r. What do we then know about the mom? Can she be big R, big R? No, because kid had to get a little r from dad and a little r from mom. Which means even though we didn't meet at a support group, mom has to be big R, little r in order for kid to have that little r. So mom was a carrier. So if an offspring negates our simplifying assumption, you have to go with it. But if you don't know anything about them, let's say they're just a couple, we just say, oh, look, these two yahoos got together. We know this yahoo is a carrier. We don't know anything about this one, mom, but she didn't meet in a support group. She's just some random person in the population. We would guess, right, that this offspring would not have it. I'm trying to write a question mark there. And so then we'd assume, if we don't know anything about their offspring or they don't have any, then we have to assume that she's big R, big R. Okay, going forward. That's just, otherwise you can't do anything. So let's just take a look at that. Okay. It gets a little complicated. Not bad. Okay. I think we can handle it.
Can we lower the volume, please?
Squidward. Give me a break. Sorry, I'll try not to talk so loud. I just want to make sure it's clear. Sometimes through the iPad, not such a good microphone. This is an old iPad too. Okay. If A is rare, unrelated person is big A, big A. So we've put in what the genotypes should be, right? So our question is, what about this kid down here? So if we didn't know anything, first we'd start by putting in the two that are affected, because if we're told it's a rare recessive disease, we know the genotypes of the guys filled in. We assume that person has to be normal, they married in, but also they have an unaffected offspring. So what do we know? Well, we know mom had to give up the little a, so where'd they get the big A? Had to be from dad, marries in, so we're going to assume big A, that he wasn't a carrier. This person marries in, right? And so what do we know about this one? We know from our Punnett square of AA to AA that offspring being normal, oops, oh my God, I suck at this. I can't even read my own writing. Okay, A. These are homozygous A's, and those are heterozygous A's. So how do we know what this person is? Well, if we're trying to track some information down a pedigree, we want to assume that they're a carrier. Otherwise, if this person's not a carrier, then there's no way this person could be it at all. So we are actually calculating the probability of this guy being a carrier. So what's the probability of this guy being a carrier if this cross gives you half and half? Well, 1/2. There's a half a chance that those two parents would give up a kid with big A, little a. This guy marries in. We have to make that assumption because the child is not affected. There's nothing else to tell us that that guy could have a little a. And so then between these two, which we're assuming, again, is big A, little a, right? So now we're going to redo that cross for these guys, but it's the same stupid cross, which means half are homozygous and half are heterozygous. So the odds are 1/2 big A, little a that guy's a carrier, right? Now over here, this guy gets a little bit crazy, right? In order for this guy here to exist, we know each parent had to have a little a, and they're both open, not affected, so they each have to have a big A. So they both have to be carriers for this to happen. They have to. Their probability is 1 or 100%. There's nothing else it could be. So then, between this cross, big A, little a, big A, little a, these parents, they have an unaffected offspring. What is the probability that this one is big A, little a? Now we know they can't be little a because they're an open circle. They already exist as unaffected. They can only be one of those three. So 1/3 chance of them being big A, and there's a 2 out of 3 chance of them being big A, little a. There's no absolute chance of them being little a because they're open. So there's no possible way this guy could be little a, little a. So it has to be either big A, a 1/3 chance, or big A, little a 2 out of 3 chance. And again, we're looking for the carrier, because if both of these guys aren't carriers, then this probability is 0. And we're looking for the probability if all these guys in the family were carriers, then what's the probability of that guy getting it? And so what do? We have to multiply all the probabilities together. It's the multiplication rule. It all has to happen in one fell swoop. So we multiply all the probabilities. So we have, I need another color. The heck? Oh, let's use black. We have 1/2 that guy's a carrier. There's a 1/2. We have 1/2 that guy's a carrier. There's his 1/2. We have a 2/3 that guy's a carrier. And then we have to do this cross down here, which is, again, a Punnett square we don't need to do because it's 1 to 2 to 1. It's a 1/4 chance of getting little a, and that's what we needs to be sick, right? What's the probability of this guy having it? So his 1/4 is here. So if we multiply a 1/2 times a 1/2 times 2/3 times a 1/4, we get a 1 in 24th probability that this kiddo down here, right there, is going to have the disorder. If this great grandma, whoever this is, has it, and then in mom's family has it. So both families have a history of this rare recessive disorder. And we can put together all these people based on their traits, what we can see, their phenotypes, right? Pedigrees are based on phenotypes. We infer genotypes from what we know. 1 in 24 chance of that kid having it. So we got to know all this stuff to answer one problem. Whew, that is crazy Malone.
Oh, please.
Yeah, the SpongeBob. Super not happy. All right, let's move on.
Are you ready, kids?
Aye, aye, Captain!
I can't hear you.
Aye, aye,
I think we're ready. Okay. Who lives in a pineapple under the sea? We don't care. We're going to talk about Jack and Jill and their cystic fibrosis problem. So again, here we go. It's the same kind of idea as the last one. Just another example, right? So we're going to work through this guy. Make sure you can come up with this exact thing. So do these squares. So do these Punnett squares, even though I say you should be able to do it in your head. Be safe. Draw out all the Punnett squares. Make sure you come up with these probabilities, right? And again, this one's what's the probability of them being sick, and make sure you can make this happen. We're going to screenshot or paper and upload, and it's going to be in the pedigree number 1 module, and we're going to call it, sorry, I will call it upload. I'm sighing again. Jack and Jill. I'm only making those noises because it is exhausting doing these tutorials. I totally dig it, but when I go, it's not because I'm mad at anybody. I'm not yelling at anybody. I'm just a person. Okay, so upload Jack and Jill. Enough, Malone. Okay, same idea. Now this changes it a little bit. What if their first child has cystic fibrosis? What's the probability their second child has it? So it changes. So do squares. Oops. Scares. Do squares and make sure you make this happen. Why is this a 1? Can they be anything else but big A, little a? If they can only be that, then there's no probability of them being a carrier. They are 100%, which is the same as 1. That was our little practice math baloney. And then, right, is this guy gonna be sick or not? Has to be that. Do the squares. Upload to, right, our module, Jack and Jill number 2. Upload. Let's take a little break. Do that other one, do this one, and then come back. Okay, enough already. All right, that's going to be it for right now. We went through the recessives. I'm going to make a separate one for the dominants. Okay? So we're going to be out, and I thank you for listening.
Good morning.
Oh, I love Patrick. Okay, thanks, guys. Appreciate it.